And here's the family business. Look, Marshall and Sons, old family business, been here at least 50 years. And on the back of these premises, in my workshop, was a film that caused so much interest about the Amplion, the tale of the Amplion. Originally, when my father, who was a fitter and turner actually by trade, he used to repair clocks and watches. And he moved to Portland to get employment in the late, just after the First World War. And he was having difficulty getting accurate time to set his clocks and watches by, because you must remember then there was no BBC broadcasting time signals or anything like that. But the only thing he found that there was that the Eiffel Tower in Paris was sending out a time signal on certain hours. And the crystal set, he thought if he built a crystal set, he could receive that and set his clocks and watches by. So he built the crystal set, and that's how he set his clocks and watches. Well, my father saw the trend, and he then decided that as people were buying and making these radio sets, valve sets, he would start a business enlarge his business to charge the accumulators, the 2-volt batteries, which he did, and bought a little paraffin generating engine. I think it was a little Crossley, and that drove a dynamo, gave you I think it was 50-volt set. And going on from that, of course, we had lighting in the house. We were probably the only house in Portland who had electric light. My brother also got interested in being a radio amateur at that time, and he used to transmit from Grove Road in Portland. And it was through him that later on I was to become an amateur myself, radio amateur. His call sign was G5XR, and mine was G2XQ. But you were licensed then by the engineer in charge of the post office. And you had to apply to the post office for permission to use and operate wireless transmitting station. And you had to give a reason why you wanted to conduct experiments in wireless telegraphy as well. And of course, one requirement, you had to be able to send and receive 12 words a minute in Morse. But that was easy. I mean, there was not much trouble. We had no trouble in the Morse code. In those days, there was nobody else on the air except 1 or 2 governmental stations like Night and Radio. And we used to test with gramophone records and go and use the audio side, because a lot of the time it was CW, in Morse key, you see. Then we went into telephony, which was much more fun. And to test it, we used these gramophone records through an amplifier. Well, eventually it got quite popular, because we were putting out a programme of gramophone records every Sunday morning from 10 to 11. So we could claim, I think, to be the original disc jockeys. I had one particular record I used to use called Silver Trumpets, and it was played by quite a well-known brass band. It was a lovely record. I've still got it somewhere, and I used to kick off with this, and then I'd go into other records. There was one record I remember was particularly asked for. It was a little girl singer, a child singer called Little Mary Hogan. I think she was Irish. Well, you know, the Irish have nice voices, and that used to be asked for time and time again. And then the voice in the old village choir and the village blacksmith, some of the old time stuff, you know. Yeah. But we, as I say, used to last about 11. And then the only thing that came on then, the BBC didn't start till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm talking on a Sunday, this moment. Didn't start till 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. All you got in the morning was the weather forecast, I believe, at 10 o'clock. And then, of course, later on, things were superseded when Radio Normandy came along from Fécamp in France, which was picked up well in this country, and Radio Luxembourg started. This is all pre-war in the 30s. And of course, once they came along, the need for us to pump out music gone, actually. I mean, people were listening to them. were only incidental. And gradually the terms of the license became more acute. Although in the old days I used to work night and radio on the Isle of Wight, and he was a post office station, and we used to exchange how good his signal was. He was a very poor signal to mine, actually, his radio telephony. And the Wolf Rock Lighthouse I used to work up regularly. And some of the coastline vessels that used to chase round to Liverpool, they go by Portlandville on the way up to the Bristol Channel, I think. And old Captain Holman used to go there and blast his whistle. I used to go out to the billet, wave at him. And we'd be communicating for us. He'd tell me what time he was arriving, you see. Yeah, it's good fun. Yeah. I remember my father had this old Patty projector, an old hand crank projector with a Maltese cross in the gate, hand turned, and one or two odd films he had, one or two Patty films. And then somewhere in the late 20s or early 30s, this Tale of the Amplion, this cartoon film appeared. And I can only surmise that the Amplion company, who were then operating from London, if I recollect their premises, they must have realised that it would be a good advertisement for them, and sent to certain selected dealers who were using their products to show in the local cinema, you see, because that was coming quite into vogue at that time. Advertisements in the local cinemas became quite a thing. At one time it was slides, beautiful glass slides. We had some at one time. And but later on these little films. And that's all I can think that came along as a result of that. And it was there for years, and then of course during the war it was laying under the bench with everything else. I as a boy I used to I put an electric motor on the old Patty projector, used to show these films in the loft. But every so often, as they were gelatine based, they'd catch fire, you see, and things like that. And all I did was blow them out. No, I didn't realise what a fire risk they were. I'd been taking care of these old films. I hadn't seen them for years, but eventually they were deteriorating, which I didn't realise. And I'd always meant to get in touch with the National Film Archives and say, you know, were they interested, but like everything else, when you're in business, you never really get round to it. And as I was now quite happy with 8mm equipment, it never occurred to me. But eventually I did get in touch, probably through you, through you. And we got in touch with the Film Archive, and they sent a special van down equipment to take them away. And that's when they, to my joy, discovered the Amplion still reasonably intact, a copy. Yes, well, this was my odd workshop where I spent many years of my life repairing radios, tape recorders, radiograms, etc. And in the far corner there, unfortunately it's very dark now, and under the bench on the left hand side was where the old 35mm films were kept. Almost 50 years I should think under that bench. And among them was the Tale of the Amplion, which caused so much interest. It brought back memories. I remember as a child being fairly horrified that the lady running away, the one rum little character, had been galloped at by this charging lion. Yeah. So that shows, I mean, I could have only been then 8 or 9, I suppose, when I first saw that film. Yeah. So that was the Tale of the Amplion. Quite an interesting film. I didn't realise it was by Heath Robinson. I must have known. I saw the title enough times, but it didn't occur to me that there was anything unique about it. And yet it must be in a way, because I think it's one of the few known examples of him ever doing it, especially a cine film.
The Amplion speaker of the day, we're talking from 1922 onwards, was basically an earphone with in front of a trumpet. Mind you, it was a very good quality earphone because Amplions didn't muck around, they used the best possible materials. It was slightly larger than the ordinary earphone, and it had this Bakelite shroud on it, and it would go into a horn. And the horn had the advantage of being an exponential, mathematically worked out and accurately designed. The bass response was not terribly good, but the treble response was quite good for the day. It was a limited frequency range, probably cut off at 3,000 or 4,000 cycles. And it had a slight sort of telephone sort of sound to it, almost what you might call wasp in a bottle. But it was, you could listen to speech and music on it, and it was good. It was the best we had until the moving coil speaker came along. So you could say the Amplion was probably the best of the horn speakers. It was certainly the most expensive. For a start, it had a good solid base, so it didn't topple over too easily. You could alter the angle of it, so you have it on a high shelf or a low shelf. It had a detachable drive unit. It also had an adjustment on it, so you could alter the spacing between the magnet and the diaphragm, so you get the best possible sound from it. It had a wooden flare. Apart from being exponential, as I explained earlier, the wooden flare meant you did not get the tin horn sound. It was better acoustically. This was limited, but it was good. It was a start. And they did it in different sizes. They had a tiny little one called the Dragonfly. They had the Amplion Dragon. They did the Goliath, and they made it a big one about 4 foot long, which was suitable for church halls and theatres, for public address systems, and was first used in great quantity at the Great Exhibition in 1924 at Olympia. I'm fairly sure that Heath Robinson had a very great interest in radio, because of the first cartoons and drawings I've seen of Heath Robinson's were radio-related subjects, like the thing he did in 1925 when he broadcast through the BBC descriptions of an amateur wireless man's listening shed or shack. And from a description, he invited people to make drawings and send it into the BBC. And we have copies of those drawings from Heath Robinson's original drawing from the first and second prize winners. His descriptions must have been very, very good.
His first love was book illustration, serious book illustration, and he established himself at the turn of the century as one of the foremost book illustrators. When the market for illustrated books dried up in about 1916, his humorous work became the main plank on which he relied, and he split his time between drawing cartoons for the magazines and working for advertisers. So it wasn't something he really wanted to do, but it was something he fell into, found he was good at, and paid very well. And with a growing family and other commitments, he had to earn a living. He enjoyed the contact with the public it gave him. He had lots of people writing in with suggestions for inventions, and it also gave him a way of contributing to the war effort by keeping morale up. He was too old to actually join up, but he did a lot of drawings relating to war themes, which I think cheered up the public. So he enjoyed that side of it, but I think he also regretted that he wasn't able to continue with his serious work as an artist. He'd done some work for Philips, who produced valves, produced a booklet called The Wireless Adventures of Mr. Pimple in 1924, which I imagine shortly preceded the Amplion film. I know that in about 1921 or 22 he was approached to turn some of his advertising drawings, I think they were for Eisel, into short films with actors, but he agreed with his agent that this would totally destroy the humour. But until this Amplion little film turned up, nothing was known of his work as an animator at all. In the early 20s he did do a daily strip for a newspaper for about a year, but concluded that it was an awful lot of hard work for very little reward. So I imagine he went into animation in the same spirit, but again found it was an awful lot of work for very little reward. I would guess that this is the only one. Having experienced the drudgery of making the individual drawings once, I don't think he would have done it again. And he wasn't the kind of person to employ students or something to fill out his drawings. He would want total control over the project. I found it fascinating. I think it typifies Heath Robinson's approach to new projects. He treats it with great simplicity. He doesn't try to emulate his magazine work. He suits the work that he's doing to the medium in which it's being produced. It also contains the element of surrealism that I think pervades his early humorous work, something that perhaps we've lost now. I think I'd just say watch it. It speaks for itself. It doesn't really need a lot of introduction.